The wind howled across the high desert plateau like a living thing, carrying with it the scent of snow and the promise of something far worse. And Victoria Owens stood in the doorway of the barn watching the sky turn the color of bruised steel while every ranch hand on the property made their excuses and rode for town. She counted them as they left, their silhouettes growing smaller against the darkening horizon, until there was nothing but empty land and the storm rolling in from the north. Her father's ranch sprawled across 3,000 acres of Utah territory. And on this February evening in 1884, she found herself alone with 200 head of cattle and a pregnant heifer that had been showing signs of distress since morning. The men had been nervous all day, casting glances at the sky and muttering about the storm that old Charlie Perkins swore would be the worst he had seen in 40 years. By the time the first flakes started to fall, thick and heavy as goose down, the bunkhouse had emptied out completely. They had made their reasons sound almost reasonable, talking about sick relatives in Moab and promises they could not break, but Victoria knew cowardice when she saw it. Her father would have horsewhipped the lot of them if he had been here, but John Owens was 300 miles away in Denver on business, and the foreman he had left in charge had been the first one to saddle up and ride out. She pulled her coat tighter and walked back into the barn where the heifer lay in the straw, her sides heaving with contractions that seemed to be going nowhere. The animal's eyes rolled white with fear and pain, and Victoria knelt beside her, running practiced hands over the distended belly. She had helped with difficult births before, had learned from her father and from the Navajo woman who had worked on the ranch when Victoria was young. But she had never done it entirely alone, and never in conditions like these. The temperature was dropping fast, the kind of cold that turned spit to ice before it hit the ground. Victoria checked the barn doors, made sure the other animals had feed and water, and settled in beside the laboring cow. She spoke softly, the way her father had taught her, keeping her voice low and steady even as the wind began to scream around the corners of the building. The heifer's breathing grew more labored, and Victoria realized with a sinking feeling that the calf was positioned wrong. She rolled up her sleeves and went to work, her hands slick with blood and birthing fluid as she tried to turn the calf inside its mother's womb. The heifer bellowed and kicked, and Victoria had to throw her weight against the animal's hindquarters to avoid getting her ribs staved in. Sweat ran down her face despite the cold, and her arms ached from shoulder to fingertip, but she kept going because there was no one else to do it, and because both animals would die if she stopped. The storm hit in full force just as she felt the calf's position shift. The wind tore at the barn with such violence that the whole structure shuddered, and snow came through every crack and gap in the walls, swirling in miniature tornadoes across the floor. Victoria braced herself and pulled, feeling the calf slide forward, feeling the heifer gather herself for one final push. There was a rush of fluid, and then the calf was there, steaming in the frigid air, and Victoria was laughing and crying at the same time as she cleared its nose and mouth and watched it take its first shuddering breath. She did not hear the barn door open over the sound of the storm. Did not know anyone else was there until a deep voice said, "That is some impressive work, miss." Victoria spun around, her hand going instinctively to the knife at her belt, and found herself looking at a man she had never seen before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, covered in snow from his hat to his boots, and he held his hands up in a gesture of peace. Even in the dim light of the lantern, she could see that his eyes were the color of summer sky, startlingly blue against his weathered face. "Who are you?" she demanded, positioning herself between him and the newborn calf. "Name is Blake Dalton," he said. "I was riding through when the storm caught me, Saw your barn and figured I would ask permission to shelter here until it passes." He nodded toward the heifer and her calf. "Looks like I arrived at an interesting time." Victoria studied him warily. He looked like a working cowboy, from his worn leather chaps to the rope calluses on his hands, but that meant nothing in this country. Plenty of outlaws dressed the part. Still, the storm was only getting worse, and whatever else he might be, he was also half frozen and clearly in need of shelter. "You can stay in the barn," she said finally, "but you keep to your side and I will keep to mine." Blake Dalton nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yes, madam. Though I have to say, after watching you deliver that calf all by yourself in the middle of a blizzard, I am more afraid of you than you need to be of me." Despite herself, Victoria felt a small, answering smile. She turned back to the calf, making sure it was nursing properly while the heifer licked it clean. Blake moved to the other end of the barn and began tending to his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that looked as travel-worn as its owner. He moved with the easy competence of someone who had spent most of his life around animals, and Victoria found herself relaxing slightly. The storm raged through the night, the wind so fierce that it seemed determined to tear the barn apart board by board. Victoria dozed fitfully in the straw, jerking awake every time the building groaned or the animals shifted nervously. Each time she woke, she could see Blake on the far side of the barn, sitting with his back against a post, his rifle across his knees. He never seemed to sleep, just kept watch through the long dark hours as if he were standing guard duty. When dawn finally came, it revealed a world transformed into something alien and hostile. Snow had drifted 20 feet high against the barn's north wall, and the wind still howled with undiminished fury. Victoria went to check on the other animals and found that 2 of the older cows had succumbed to the cold during the night despite the barn's shelter. It was a loss, but not a catastrophic one, and the fact that she still had most of the herd was more than she had dared hope for when the storm began. Blake helped her drag the dead animals outside, working in silence through the hip-deep drifts. When they were done, he followed her back into the barn and said, "You are going to need help getting through this storm. Where are your ranch hands?" "Gone," Victoria said flatly. "Rode out yesterday when they saw the storm coming." She watched his expression darken. "They left you here alone." "They did." Blake was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "How long until your family gets back?" "My father is in Denver. He will not be home for another 3 weeks at least." "And until then, you were planning to run this whole ranch by yourself?" Victoria lifted her chin. "I was not planning anything. This is just how things are." She saw something shift in his face, a mixture of anger and something else she could not quite identify. He looked around the barn, at the cattle huddled together for warmth, at the new calf that was already trying to stand on wobbly legs. When his eyes came back to her, they were filled with determination. "Then I guess I am staying," he said. Victoria started to protest, but he held up a hand. "Before you argue, consider this. You need help, whether you want to admit it or not. This storm is going to last at least another day, maybe 2, and then you are going to have the aftermath to deal with. Fences down, animals scattered, God knows what else. I am a good worker, and I do not ask much in the way of payment. Just food and a place to sleep until your father gets back." She wanted to say no, wanted to send him on his way as soon as the storm broke and prove that she could handle everything on her own. But she was also practical enough to know that pride was a luxury she could not afford right now. The ranch was too big, the work too demanding, and if she tried to do it all herself, she would run herself into the ground within a week. "All right," she said, "but this is temporary. Just until my father returns." Blake nodded, and if he was pleased by her acceptance, he did not show it. Fair enough. Now, why don't you tell me what needs doing and we can get started? They worked together through the second day of the storm and into the third, when the wind finally began to lose its fury, and the snow tapered off to scattered flurries. Blake proved to be as good as his word, working tirelessly to keep the animals fed and the barn secure. He did not ask personal questions or try to make conversation beyond what was necessary for the work, and Victoria found that she appreciated his quiet competence more than she would have expected. When the storm finally broke on the fourth day, the sun came out over a landscape that looked like something from a fairy tale. The snow sparkled blindingly white in all directions, sculpted by the wind into fantastic shapes and patterns. But beneath the beauty lay serious problems. 3 sections of fence were down, scattered with debris and half-buried drifts. A dozen cattle were missing, probably sheltering in one of the canyons that cut through the ranch's northern section. And the main water tank had frozen solid, which meant they would have to break ice twice daily to keep the herd watered. Victoria and Blake rode out together to assess the damage, their horses struggling through the deep snow. The cold was brutal, the kind that made every breath burn in the lungs, but the day was calm and clear, and Victoria felt her spirits lift slightly as they surveyed the property. It was bad, but not as bad as it could have been. With hard work and a little luck, they could have everything sorted before her father returned. They found the missing cattle in a box canyon about 3 miles from the main ranch buildings, huddled together beneath an overhang that had provided just enough shelter to keep them alive. Blake rode down into the canyon and hazed them out while Victoria guided them back toward home. It was exhausting work, and by the time they got the animals back into the main pasture, both of them were so tired they could barely stay in the saddle. That night, Victoria invited Blake into the main house for supper. It seemed the least she could do after everything he had done to help, and besides, the bunkhouse was cold and empty with all the other hands gone. She cooked a simple meal of beans and salt pork, with cornbread she had learned to make from her father's old cook, and they ate in companionable silence at the big kitchen table. "Tell me something," Blake said, as he mopped up the last of his beans with a piece of cornbread. "Why did you not go to town with the others when the storm came in?" Victoria set down her fork and considered the question. "This is my home," she said finally. "My father built this ranch from nothing, worked himself half to death to make it profitable. I was not about to abandon it just because the weather turned bad, even if it meant risking your life, especially then." She met his eyes across the table. "What about you? Why were you out riding in the middle of nowhere when that storm hit?" Blake was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I am a drifter," he said. "Have been for the past 5 years. I go where the work is, stay as long as I am needed, then move on. I was heading down to Moab to see about a job on one of the cattle drives when the weather caught me." "Where are you from originally?" "Kansas. Had a small ranch there with my brother." His expression darkened. "Had being the operative word. We lost it 4 years back. Bad drought followed by an even worse winter, and then the bank came calling. My brother settled down with his wife's family back east, but I could not see myself doing that, so I took to the road instead." Victoria heard the pain in his voice and felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. She knew what it was like to love a place so much that losing it would feel like losing a part of yourself. "I am sorry," she said quietly. Blake shrugged. "It is in the past. Nothing to be done about it now except keep moving forward." He looked at her with those startlingly blue eyes. "Though I have to admit, watching you fight for this place the way you have these past few days, it reminds me why I loved ranching in the first place. You have got a strength in you that most men do not have, Miss Owens. Your father should be proud." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked away, unused to such direct praise. "I am just doing what needs to be done," she said. "Maybe so. But not everyone has the courage to do that." They fell into a routine over the following days. Blake moved into the bunkhouse despite Victoria's offer of a room in the main house, saying it did not feel right to impose on her hospitality any more than necessary. They worked from dawn until dark, repairing fences and clearing snow and making sure the herd stayed healthy. The calf that had been born during the storm thrived, growing stronger every day, and Victoria found herself feeling absurdly proud of it, as if its survival were a personal victory. She also found herself thinking about Blake Dalton far more than she should. He was unfailingly polite and respectful, never stepping over the bounds of propriety, but there was something about him that drew her attention. The way he sat a horse, relaxed and confident. The way his hands looked when he worked with rope, quick and sure. The rare smile that transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. She told herself it was just gratitude. He had helped her when she needed it, and it was natural to feel warmth towards someone who had proven himself trustworthy. But late at night, lying in her bed and listening to the wind whisper around the eaves, she knew it was more than that. She was developing feelings for this drifter cowboy, and the knowledge both thrilled and terrified her. 2 weeks after the storm, on a clear cold morning when the sun turned the snow to fields of diamonds, they were working together to replace a section of fence posts when Blake suddenly went still. Victoria followed his gaze and saw 3 riders approaching from the east, dark shapes against the white landscape. "Friends of yours?" Blake asked, his hand dropping casually to the pistol at his hip. Victoria shook her head. "I do not recognize them." They rode back to meet the strangers near the barn, and as they got closer, Victoria felt a cold knot form in her stomach. The men looked rough, with the hard eyes and aggressive bearing of those who took what they wanted and did not care much about the law. The leader, a heavy-set man with a scarred face and tobacco-stained beard, looked Victoria up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Well now," he said, his voice thick with false friendliness. "Looks like we found ourselves a little ranch with no men around to protect it." "That is some bad luck for you, girlie." Blake moved his horse between Victoria and the strangers, his posture deceptively relaxed. "The lady has got all the protection she needs," he said quietly. "I suggest you boys ride on." The scarred man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You suggesting?" "That is rich. 3 of us and 1 of you, and you are suggesting we do something?" "I am." Something in Blake's voice made the other 2 riders shift nervously in their saddles. The scarred man scowled, clearly unused to being challenged. His hand moved toward his gun, and Victoria's heart leaped into her throat. But before he could draw, Blake had his pistol out and aimed with a speed that seemed almost supernatural. "Do not," Blake said, and now all the casual friendliness was gone from his voice, replaced by something cold and dangerous. "You touch that gun and you will be dead before you hit the ground. I have given you a chance to ride away. I am not going to give you another one." The scarred man stared at Blake for a long moment, and Victoria could see him weighing his options. Finally, he spat in the snow and turned his horse. "This is not over," he said. "Yes," Blake replied, his gun still steady. "It is." They watched the 3 men ride away, and Victoria did not realize she had been holding her breath until they disappeared over a rise. Blake holstered his pistol and turned to her, his expression concerned. "You all right?" he asked. Victoria nodded, though her hands were shaking. "That was close." "Too close. Those are the kind of men who will come back if they think they can get away with it." He paused, clearly thinking hard. Do you have any neighbors you trust? Anyone who could send some men over to help keep watch? The Petersons have a ranch about 10 miles south. They are good people. Then I think we should ride over there today and let them know what happened. Safety in numbers, especially with men like that around. They rode to the Peterson ranch that afternoon, and George Peterson, a grizzled cattleman in his 60s, immediately offered to send 2 of his sons over to help keep watch until Victoria's father returned. He also sent his wife and daughter back with them, saying that Victoria should not be alone in the house with all this trouble brewing. Mary Peterson was a warm-hearted woman in her 50s who immediately took charge of the kitchen and began cooking enough food to feed a small army. Her daughter, Emma, was close to Victoria's age and full of cheerful chatter that helped ease the tension of the previous days. With the Peterson brothers taking turns on watch and Blake continuing to handle the ranch work, Victoria finally felt like she could breathe again. But the incident with the scarred man had changed something between her and Blake. She caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not quite read, something tender and fierce all at once, and she found herself noticing details about him that she had tried to ignore before. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the sound of his laughter, rare but genuine, when one of the Peterson boys told a particularly good joke. One evening about a week later, Victoria went out to the barn to check on the animals before bed and found Blake there, sitting on a hay bale and staring at nothing. He looked up when she entered, and she saw something raw and unguarded in his face before he could hide it. Could not sleep. She asked, settling onto a bale across from him. Too much thinking, he admitted. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I need to tell you something. Victoria felt her heart start to pound. All right. When I first came here, I figured I would stay until the storm passed and then move on, same as I have done everywhere else for the past 5 years. But something changed. You changed it. He looked directly at her, his blue eyes intense in the lantern light. I have been running from what I lost for so long that I forgot what it felt like to want to stay somewhere, to build something instead of just drifting through. And then I watched you deliver that calf all by yourself, refusing to give up even when everything seemed impossible, and I realized I did not want to run anymore. Victoria's breath caught in her throat. Blake, I am not good with words, he continued, and I do not have much to offer. No land, no money, just my labor and my loyalty. But I am falling in love with you, Victoria Owens, and I needed you to know that before your father comes home and I lose my nerve. For a moment, Victoria could not speak. She had known she had feelings for him, but hearing him say those words out loud made everything suddenly, startlingly real. And instead of feeling frightened, she felt like she was finally allowing herself to want something she had not even known she needed. I am glad you lost your nerve with words, she said softly, because you said exactly the right thing. She moved from her hay bale to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. I have been trying not to feel this way about you, trying to tell myself it was just gratitude or loneliness or anything, except what it actually was. But the truth is, I started falling for you the moment I turned around and saw you standing in that barn, covered in snow and offering to help a stranger. You did not run when things got hard. You stayed. And that means more to me than any amount of land or money ever could. Blake reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with infinite gentleness. I am not going anywhere, he said. Not unless you want me to. I do not want you to, Victoria whispered. I want you to stay, for as long as you will have me. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, and the gesture was so unexpectedly tender that Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. Then he was pulling her close, and she was wrapping her arms around him, and for the first time in weeks, she felt truly safe. They sat like that for a long time, holding each other in the warm silence of the barn while the cattle shifted in their stalls, and the lantern light cast dancing shadows on the walls. They did not speak of love again over the next few days, but it was there in every glance and gesture. The way Blake always made sure she had coffee in the morning. The way Victoria started wearing her mother's old cameo pin, as if she needed something special to mark the change in her life. The way they found excuses to work near each other, even when the tasks would have been more efficiently done separately. Mary Peterson noticed, of course. Women always did. But she said nothing except to give Victoria a knowing smile and a pat on the arm. Emma was less subtle, demanding to know if Victoria and the handsome drifter were courting, and laughing with delight when Victoria blushed and refused to answer directly. John Owens returned from Denver 3 weeks after the storm, riding in with 2 new horses and a satisfied look that said his business had gone well. He took one look at the repaired fences and the healthy cattle and the new calf gamboling in the snow, and turned to Victoria with raised eyebrows. "I leave you alone for a month and you manage to make it through the worst blizzard in 40 years without losing more than a handful of stock," he said. "I am impressed, daughter." "I had help," Victoria said, and told him the whole story. About the ranch hands running off, about delivering the calf alone, about Blake appearing in the middle of the storm and staying to help her through the aftermath. She did not tell him about her feelings, not yet, but she saw her father's eyes narrow thoughtfully as he watched Blake work. That evening, John invited Blake to have dinner at the main house. It was clearly meant to be a subtle interrogation, and Victoria felt her nerves jangling as she served the meal. But Blake handled himself well, answering her father's questions honestly and without embellishment. He told about losing his ranch in Kansas, about the years of drifting, about his plans to find steady work somewhere. "You planning to keep drifting?" John asked at one point. Blake glanced at Victoria and something passed between them. "That depends," he said carefully. "I have been a wanderer for a long time, but I am thinking it might be time to put down roots somewhere." John followed his gaze and nodded slowly. "I see." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I need a new foreman. The last one proved himself unreliable, as I understand it. The job pays $50 a month plus room and board, and there is a small cabin on the property that needs some fixing up but would be livable with work. You interested?" Blake's face went very still. "Sir, before you answer, you should know that my daughter is the most important thing in the world to me," John continued. "She is all I have left since her mother passed, and I would do just about anything to see her happy. Over the course of this past month, she has proven to me and to herself that she is more than capable of running this ranch someday. But she is going to need a partner, someone strong enough to stand beside her instead of trying to stand in front of her. Someone who will respect her strength instead of being threatened by it." He leaned back in his chair and fixed Blake with a measuring look. "Think you might be that man?" Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. She had known her father loved her, but hearing him say these things, acknowledging her capability and her right to choose her own path, meant more than she could put into words. Blake cleared his throat, clearly moved. "Mr. Owens, I cannot think of anything I would rather be." "Good. Then the job is yours, along with my blessing to court my daughter properly." John stood and extended his hand. "Welcome to the Owens Ranch, Blake Dalton." They were married that June, in a small ceremony in Moab with half the town in attendance. Victoria wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and carried wildflowers that Blake had picked that morning from the high meadow behind the ranch. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed her with such tender passion that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. They spent their wedding night in the newly repaired cabin, which Blake had worked on every spare moment over the past 3 months. He had made furniture by hand, carved their initials into the door frame, and filled the small space with so much care and attention that Victoria cried when she first saw it. "This is ours," Blake said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they stood in the doorway watching the sun set over the desert. "Our home, our beginning." Victoria turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into that single gesture. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you so much it frightens me sometimes." "Do not be frightened," Blake murmured, holding her close. "I am not going anywhere. This is where I belong, with you, always." They made love that night with a tenderness that gradually built to passion, learning each other's bodies and finding new ways to express what words could not fully capture. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Victoria felt a sense of completeness she had never experienced before. This was what she had been waiting for without knowing it. This connection, this partnership, this love. The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. Blake proved to be an excellent foreman, managing the ranch hands with a firm but fair hand, and making improvements that increased the ranch's productivity year after year. Victoria worked alongside him, earning the respect of the men through her competence, and earning their affection through her fairness. Together, they turned the Owens Ranch into one of the most successful operations in Utah Territory. John Owens lived to see his first grandchild born, a sturdy boy with his grandfather's stubborn chin and his father's blue eyes. They named him Samuel, after Blake's father, and John held him with such pride and tenderness that Victoria wished she could freeze that moment forever. When her father passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, Victoria grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing he had died happy, surrounded by the family he had wanted so desperately for his daughter. Blake held her through the worst of it, his strength becoming her anchor when she felt like she might drown in loss. They had 3 more children over the next 8 years. Another boy, James, who had his mother's dark hair and serious nature. Then twin girls, Rose and Lily, who were so identical that even their parents sometimes struggled to tell them apart. The cabin proved too small for their growing family, so they built a larger house halfway between the old cabin and the main ranch house, filling it with laughter and love and the organized chaos of children. Blake turned out to be a wonderful father, patient and playful but firm when necessary. Victoria would sometimes watch him with the children, teaching Samuel to rope or reading stories to the twins, and feel her heart swell with so much love she thought it might burst. This was the life she had been meant for. Not just running the ranch, though she loved that too, but building this family with the man who had appeared in her barn on a stormy night and changed everything. On their 10th anniversary, Blake surprised her with a trip back to that same barn where they had first met. He had decorated it with lanterns and wildflowers and prepared a picnic supper that they ate sitting on hay bales, laughing at how much had changed since that frightening night. "You ever regret it?" Victoria asked as they sat together watching the sun set through the open barn door. Giving up the wandering life, Blake pulled her close and kissed her temple. "Not for a single second. I spent 5 years searching for something without knowing what I was looking for. And then I found you, stubborn and strong and covered in blood from delivering a calf in the middle of a blizzard, and I realized you were what I had been searching for all along. You were home." Victoria rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and sage and something uniquely Blake. "I am glad you got caught in that storm," she said softly. "I am glad no one else would go out to help, because it meant you were the one who came. I would not change a single moment of how we found each other. Even the scary parts, especially the scary parts, they led us here." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded and the stars began to emerge overhead. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting from that chance encounter. The heifer that Victoria had helped that night had gone on to produce many more calves, and her descendants were now scattered throughout the herd. The barn had been repaired and expanded, and new buildings had been added as the ranch grew, but this original structure remained, a testament to where their story had begun. As they finally rose to head back to the house where their children were waiting, Blake took Victoria's hand and laced his fingers through hers. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing something worth staying for in a drifter cowboy. For trusting me when you had no reason to. For building this life with me." He stopped and turned to face her, his blue eyes bright even in the gathering darkness. "For loving me the way you do. I know I do not say it enough, but you are everything to me, Victoria. Everything." She reached up and cupped his weathered face in her hands, this man who had stolen her heart so completely. "You are my everything too," she whispered. "My partner, my love, my home. I would choose you again and again in every lifetime, in every storm." He kissed her then, deep and slow and full of promise, and she kissed him back with all the passion and tenderness of a decade spent loving him. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, they walked hand in hand back to their house, back to their children, back to the life they had built together from that single storm-tossed night. The years continued to pass, marked by seasons and celebrations, challenges and triumphs. Samuel grew into a young man who loved ranching as much as his parents did, showing early signs of the leadership that would one day make him an excellent steward of the land. James discovered a talent for training horses, working with even the most difficult animals with a patience that reminded Victoria of her father. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and sharing secrets in their own private language. Blake's hair began to show threads of silver at the temples, and Victoria noticed laugh lines around her eyes when she looked in the mirror, but they wore their aging like badges of honor. Each line represented a year together, a memory made, a challenge overcome. They had built something real and lasting, and the evidence of that work was everywhere she looked. In the prosperous ranch that employed 30 men. In the strong, healthy children who carried their legacy forward. In the love that had only deepened and strengthened with time. One spring morning when Victoria was 42, she found Blake standing in the doorway of their bedroom watching her brush her hair. She caught his eye in the mirror and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "That day in the barn, the storm. How different my life would be if I had not decided to ask for shelter here." Victoria set down her brush and turned to face him. "Where do you think you would be now?" Blake shook his head. "I do not know. Still drifting, probably. Still searching for something I never would have found because it was here all along." He crossed the room and took her hands. "I think about that sometimes, about how easy it would have been to ride past this ranch and keep going. How one choice, one moment of deciding to turn toward your barn instead of away from it, changed absolutely everything." "That was not the choice that mattered most," Victoria said softly. "The choice that mattered was when you decided to stay. When you could have left after the storm but chose to help me instead. That is when everything truly changed." "I could not leave you alone to face all that," Blake said simply. "By then I was already halfway in love with you." "Only halfway," he grinned. "All right, more than halfway." Pretty much completely, if I am being honest. I just did not have the words for it yet. She stood on her toes and kissed him, still thrilled by the fact that she could do this whenever she wanted, that this incredible man was hers and she was his. I am glad you found the words eventually. Me too, he murmured against her lips. They were interrupted by the sound of childish laughter and running feet as the twins came racing down the hallway, followed by Samuel trying unsuccessfully to catch them. Victoria and Blake broke apart, laughing, and went to sort out whatever mischief the girls had gotten into now. This was their life. Messy and busy and full of more love than Victoria had ever imagined possible. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she thought about that terrifying night when the storm hit and all the ranch hands fled, leaving her alone with a laboring heifer and no help in sight. She had been so frightened, so determined to prove she could handle it, so convinced that asking for help would make her weak. And then Blake had appeared, snow-covered and offering shelter, and in helping her deliver that calf he had delivered her heart as well. He had shown her that strength did not mean facing everything alone, that accepting help was not weakness but wisdom. That love, real love, meant finding someone who saw your capability and your vulnerability and valued both equally. The ranch continued to thrive. They expanded their holdings, buying additional land from neighbors who were ready to retire. Samuel married a wonderful woman named Catherine, who had grown up on a ranch in Colorado and understood the demands of the life they led. James found love as well, with a schoolteacher from Moab who brought books and culture into their rough-hewn world and loved him fiercely, despite her more refined upbringing. The twins proved harder to settle down, both of them inheriting their mother's independent streak and their father's wandering blood. Rose eventually became a horse trader, traveling throughout the territory and earning a reputation for her uncanny ability to match horses with owners. Lily, to everyone's surprise, became a doctor, studying in San Francisco and returning to Moab to open a practice that served the whole county. Blake and Victoria watched their children forge their own paths with pride and the bittersweet knowledge that this was how it was supposed to be. They had given their children roots and wings both, and now they watched them fly while knowing they would always have a home to return to. On their 25th anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter, and as Victoria stood on the porch watching the organized chaos, Blake came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Incredibly," she said, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life, that I got so lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Blake said firmly. "You fought for this. We both did. Every day, every year, choosing each other and choosing this life. That is not luck, my love, that is dedication." Victoria turned in his arms and looked up at him, at the man who had wandered into her life during a blizzard and never left. His hair was mostly silver now, and there were deep lines around his eyes and mouth, but he was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. Still the one who made her heart race when he smiled. Still the one she wanted to fall asleep beside every night and wake up with every morning. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been 25 years ago. "I love you so much, Blake Dalton." "And I love you, Victoria Dalton. I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that too." They kissed there on the porch, surrounded by the noise of their family and the vast beauty of the land they had built their life on. Two souls who had found each other in a storm and created something beautiful from that chance meeting. The years became decades. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 35th. Samuel took over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, giving Blake and Victoria time to enjoy their golden years together. They took long rides across the property, just the two of them, revisiting the places that held memories. The box canyon where they had found the cattle after the storm. The spot where Blake had confronted the scarred man and his companions. The barn where everything had begun. That barn was Victoria's favorite place. They had kept it exactly as it had been that night, had refused to modernize or change it, wanting to preserve the space where their story started. Sometimes Victoria would go there just to sit and remember. The fear and determination she had felt delivering that calf alone. The shock of turning around to find Blake standing there. The way his voice had sounded when he first told her he loved her. Blake found her there one evening as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He settled onto the hay bale beside her and took her hand without speaking. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light fade, two people who had shared so much that words were often unnecessary. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Victoria asked finally. "After you saw me deliver the calf," Blake smiled. "I said it was impressive work. You also said you were more afraid of me than I needed to be of you." "That was true then, and it is still true now," Blake said with a chuckle. "You are the strongest person I have ever known, Victoria. You always have been." "I am strong because you made me stronger," she said softly. "Because you showed me what love looked like when it was real and true and lasting. I thought I knew what I wanted from life before you came along. I thought running this ranch and proving I could do it alone was enough. But you taught me that having someone to share the burden and the joy with did not make me weaker. It made everything better." Blake lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, the same gesture he had made so many times over the years. "We made each other better," he said. "That is what love is supposed to do." They sat until the stars came out, talking and reminiscing. Two old people who had lived a full and beautiful life together and knew they had been blessed beyond measure. When they finally stood to walk back to the house, both of them moved more slowly than they once had. But Blake still held Victoria's hand, and she still felt that flutter in her chest when their fingers intertwined. Their love story had begun in drama and near disaster, in a storm that could have ended in tragedy, but instead became the catalyst for everything good that followed. From that single night of a woman delivering a calf alone and a cowboy who appeared to help her, an entire life had grown. Children and grandchildren, decades of partnership, a love that had weathered every storm life threw at it and emerged stronger each time. They lived to celebrate their 40th anniversary, surrounded by 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. The ranch was now one of the most successful in the entire territory, a testament to the hard work and love that had built it. But more than the material success, Blake and Victoria had created something far more valuable. They had built a family founded on love and respect, on equality and partnership, on the knowledge that two people working together could accomplish far more than either could alone. On a warm summer evening just after their 42nd anniversary, Blake and Victoria sat together on the porch swing they had installed years ago. Victoria was dozing against his shoulder, exhausted from a long day helping with the new foal that had been born that morning. Blake held her close, his arm around her shoulders, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing and thanking whatever providence had guided him to this ranch on that storm-tossed night so many years ago. "Blake," Victoria murmured, half asleep. "I am here, my love. I want you to know something." She shifted to look up at him, her eyes soft and serious. "If I had it all to do over again, if I could go back to that night in the barn, I would not change a single thing. Not the fear, not the loneliness, not the struggle. Because all of it led me to you, and you are worth everything I went through to find you." Blake felt his throat tighten with emotion. After 42 years, she could still move him to tears with her words. "And you are worth every mile I wandered, every night I spent alone wondering if I would ever find a place to call home. You are my home, Victoria. You always have been." She smiled and nestled back against his shoulder. "Good answer, Cowboy." They sat together as the sun set and the night birds began to sing. Two souls who had found each other in the chaos of a blizzard and built a love that would last for all their days. The calf that Victoria had delivered alone that night had long since become beef, but its offspring still grazed on the ranch lands. The barn where Blake had first appeared still stood, a monument to beginnings. And the love they had forged in that desperate, storm-tossed moment had grown into something vast and unshakable. Years later, when their children and grandchildren told the story of how Blake and Victoria met, they always emphasized the drama of it. The terrible storm, the cowardly ranch hands who fled, the young woman who refused to abandon her post even in the face of danger, the mysterious drifter who appeared just when she needed him most, the instant connection that grew into lasting love. But Blake and Victoria knew the real story was both simpler and more profound than that. Yes, there had been drama and danger. Yes, their first meeting had been unusual and memorable. But what mattered, what had always mattered, was the choice they made in the days and weeks and years that followed. The choice to stay, the choice to trust, the choice to build something together rather than face life alone. Love, real love, was not just about the grand gestures or the dramatic moments. It was about showing up every day and choosing your partner over and over again. It was about delivering calves in blizzards and fixing fences and raising children and navigating all the mundane challenges of life together. It was about holding hands on the porch swing as the sun set and knowing that this person beside you was your home, your partner, your love, now and always. As they grew older, their bodies began to fail them in small ways. Blake's knees ached in the cold, a reminder of too many years working in harsh conditions. Victoria's hands became gnarled with arthritis, though she still refused to give up her morning rides. They helped each other, covering for weaknesses and celebrating strengths, partners in failing as they had been partners in everything else. On a clear spring morning when Victoria was 70 and Blake was 73, they rode out together to the high meadow where he had picked wildflowers for their wedding so many years ago. The same flowers were blooming now, carpeting the ground in yellow and purple and white. They dismounted carefully, both of them stiff from the ride, and walked hand in hand through the blossoms. "This place always makes me think of new beginnings," Victoria said, breathing in the sweet scent of the flowers. "Every day with you is a new beginning," Blake replied. "Every morning I wake up next to you, I get to fall in love with you all over again." She laughed, the sound still as beautiful to him as it had been 4 decades ago. "You old romantic. Only for you, my love, only for you." They stood together in the meadow, surrounded by beauty and bathed in golden sunlight, two people who had lived a full and magnificent life together. There would be more years, more memories to make, more challenges to face. But they would face them together, as they always had, with love and strength and unwavering partnership. The story of how they met, of the storm and the calf and the chance encounter that changed everything, would be told and retold through generations. But the real story, the one that mattered most, was simpler. It was the story of two people who found each other when they needed each other most, and who chose every day to keep finding each other, to keep choosing each other, to keep loving each other with everything they had. That was the true miracle. Not the drama of that first night, but the quiet constancy of all the days and nights that followed. A love that began in a storm and lasted a lifetime, growing stronger and deeper with every passing year. A partnership built on respect and trust and genuine affection. A life shared fully, with all its joys and sorrows, triumphs and defeats, ordinary moments and extraordinary ones. Blake Dalton had been a drifter searching for home when he stumbled into Victoria Owens' barn on that fateful night. Victoria Owens had been a stubborn young woman trying to prove she did not need anyone's help when Blake appeared out of the storm. Neither of them had been looking for love, but they found it anyway, in the most unlikely of circumstances. And once they found it, they held on to it with both hands and never let go. Their love story was not perfect. They fought sometimes, disagreed on things, had moments of frustration and doubt. But they always came back to each other, always chose reconciliation over resentment, always remembered that they were on the same team. And that, more than the romantic beginning or the dramatic moments, was what made their love real and lasting. As the sun began to set on that spring day in the meadow, Blake and Victoria made their way slowly back to their horses. Victoria paused before mounting, looking back at the field of wildflowers, and Blake saw tears in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked gently. "I am just grateful," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for all of it. The storm that brought you to me, the years we have had together, the family we built, the love we found. I know I do not say it enough, but I am so grateful, Blake, for you, for us, for this beautiful life." He pulled her close, holding her against his heart the way he had done thousands of times before. "I am grateful too," he whispered into her hair. "Every single day, I thank God or fate or whatever power brought me to your barn that night. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Victoria Dalton. The very best thing." They held each other as the light faded around them, two souls bound together by love and time and choice. And when they finally pulled apart and mounted their horses to ride home, they did so with the certain knowledge that they would face whatever time remained together, with the same strength and love and partnership that had carried them through 4 decades. Their story, which had begun with a woman delivering a calf alone in a storm and a cowboy who arrived just in time to fall in love with her, had become something far greater than either of them could have imagined. It had become a legacy of love, passed down through children and grandchildren, a testament to what two people could build when they chose each other and kept choosing each other, day after day, year after year. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering twilight, Victoria looked over at Blake and saw him silhouetted against the dying light, still handsome despite his years, still strong despite his aging body, still the man she had fallen in love with on that storm-tossed night. And Blake looked back at her and saw the same fierce, capable woman who had stolen his heart while covered in blood and birthing fluid, refusing to give up even when everyone else had abandoned her. They smiled at each other across the distance, a smile that said everything words could not. A smile that spoke of love and understanding, of shared history and future promise, of gratitude for what they had found and determination to hold on to it until the very end. And as the stars began to emerge overhead, and the lights of the ranch house beckoned them home, Blake and Victoria Dalton rode side by side, partners in all things, their love as enduring as the land beneath their horses' hooves and as vast as the Montana sky above them. Their story had begun in chaos and storm, but it had become something beautiful and lasting, a love for the ages built one choice one day, one moment at a time. The end of their story, when it eventually came, found them exactly as they had lived, together. They passed away within hours of each other on a quiet autumn afternoon, both of them in their 80s, both surrounded by family, both holding hands as they had held hands for more than half a century. It was as if neither could bear to continue without the other, as if the bond they had forged was so strong that even death could not sever it completely. Their funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives they had touched, ranch hands who had worked for them over the years, neighbors who had witnessed their devotion to each other and to the land, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even a few great-great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the legacy of love and partnership that Blake and Victoria had exemplified. The story of how they met became family legend, told at gatherings and holidays, passed down through generations. But those who had known them best understood that the real story was not about that single dramatic night. It was about the thousands of ordinary days that followed, the quiet moments of connection, the steadfast commitment to each other through good times and bad. In the barn where they first met, their great-grandson installed a plaque with a simple inscription. In this place, on a storm-tossed night in February 1884, Blake Dalton and Victoria Owens found each other and built a love that would last a lifetime. May all who shelter here be blessed with the same courage, strength, and devotion they showed to each other and to this land. The ranch continued to operate, managed by the family they had created, a living testament to what two people could build when they combined love with hard work and determination. The cattle still grazed the same pastures. The barn still stood as it had that fateful night. And the story of the woman who delivered a calf alone in a blizzard, and the cowboy who fell in love with her, continued to be told, a reminder that the greatest love stories often begin in the most unlikely moments, when two souls find each other exactly when they need each other most. Their love had been real and imperfect and beautiful, marked by passion and tenderness, by disagreements and reconciliations, by ordinary days and extraordinary moments. It had been built on respect and trust, on shared labor and shared dreams, on the thousand small choices to stay and love and build together. And in the end, it had been exactly what both of them had needed without knowing they needed it. A home, a partnership, a love that transformed everything. The storm that had brought them together had passed long ago, but its effects rippled forward through time, touching everyone who came after them. Because Blake and Victoria had not just built a ranch or raised a family. They had created a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Proof that even the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. And so their story ended where it began, in that barn surrounded by the land they loved, with family surrounding them and their hands joined together one final time. Two people who had found each other in chaos and built something lasting from that chance encounter. Two souls who had chosen each other every day for more than 50 years, and who would, in whatever came after, continue to choose each other for eternity. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West during one of the worst blizzards in memory, when a young woman refused to abandon her post, and a drifter cowboy chose to stay and help. From that single night of courage and desperation, a lifetime of love had grown. And though they were gone now, their story remained, a testament to the transformative power of love and the beauty of two hearts finding their home in each other.